now.
Okay, we're recording. All right.
Okay, if the stream freezes up in the middle of this, then that's my hard drive giving out. So see how that works. Anyway, let's not put numbers in front of these because these are not listed in order of importance right now. There's our proportions. There's our form. And then we have things like function. Let's talk about hand proportions, for example, or let's take a different example and then apply that to hands, because the cool thing about using a process like this when you want to study is that you can apply to different criteria, different disciplines. So you have proportions. If you know a human and you designate maximum height to this human and minimum height, and then you say, okay, there's something in the middle, there's our 50% of the body height, and you can pretty much always guesstimate that, yeah, the head and torso are going to be roughly above this middle threshold, and the legs are going to be below that, for example. And then you can, now you have made a consideration as to what the proportion of something is. Then you can convert this into different things. For example, if you want to go from here to form and analyze, okay, what do we have here? Our forms are a circle, some kind of rounded off box. So we take the box and we round off the corners, and then we talk about the legs, which are, let's say we make it a bit simpler and we say these are essentially two long boxes. And then another box, that's a bit too low, another box for the hips. So this, and this. And then we consider, okay, how does this work in 3 dimensions? Similar. So this box, or this rectangle, becomes a box. These two other boxes might become cylinders. And then this torso, which has this weird rounded off shape, also becomes this rounded off shape in 3 dimensions, and so forth. The circle becomes a sphere. Not a very proportional human being, but that's the idea, that you convert this. So how does this relate to hands? Because the biggest issue with hands is that they're so complicated that sometimes we stop thinking about what's actually going on and just start to copy what, instead of understanding what's happening with the hand. So with the hand, we have a similar thing going on. We can make our restrictions to the form, and we say, okay, we can even do like the cut in the middle. And with that, we can say, okay, if you look at your hand, and I need to see myself right now, if you look at your hand right now, do it right now, you can see that your middle finger is roughly the same length as the rest of your hand. Right? You look at this, take this measurement, and then pull it down, then okay, yeah, from the wrist to where the middle finger starts, roughly the same length of the middle finger. So we can use that to study our proportions. So we say, okay, we have this shape, this rectangle, and this is going to be the flat of the hand, and then this right here is going to be our middle finger, essentially. And something interesting with proportions of the hand that we're going to get a bit deeper into, your fingers and the bones in your hand are not equal length. Logically, your little finger is called that for a reason, right? So your little finger is the smallest finger on your hand and is roughly 2/3 of the length of your middle finger. So you can pretty much pinpoint that here. And then your ring and ring finger and index finger might be the same length and slightly shorter than your middle finger. So 1, 2, 3, 4 fingers. We're going to talk about the thumb in a second. But then you get a shape that we're going to look at later a bit more in depth. But this is essentially the kind of shape we're dealing with. You can put this also into the same rectangle. Why? Also something we're going to talk about when we talk about gesture. And then the thumb, originating roughly also 1/3 from where your wrist would be, roughly, to 1/2. Depending on where you want to put the bones. And then depending on the person, the thumb roughly ends, if you put it like close to your hand, close to the rest of your fingers, stopping roughly where the knuckle of the index finger is. This should be a good indication. So now we have our proportions, which is great. That is a lot of work already done. Now we need to understand what we've actually drawn. We know roughly the distances between things, but what happens if we don't want to draw hands flat all the time, like essentially just not always drawing a stop sign, right? We need to do something else with this. So how do we do this? We're going to do this consideration. So the two simplest building blocks, and this is something that once we've gone through this, we really don't need to go much further when it comes to, well, a bit further when it comes to figure drawing, because at some point you stop applying detail, right? Because you have only so much time for a pose. But with this, okay, we're going to simplify this, and then we talk about the form, because this is a bit more complicated than what I've drawn up here. But we used a square / a rectangle, because this is slightly longer than it is wide. Again, refer to your own hand for this. Mileage may vary, different body types, different anatomy and stuff like that. This is all rule of thumb, so don't make it like don't make it law. And then we have this somewhat tapering shape for our fingers. And then we have the thumb here. I'm going to divide the thumb into two other pieces. One is the first bone that we have for the thumb, roughly this here, and then the other two joints of the thumb, which would do something like this. The thumb isn't that far away from the hand, but for the purpose of this, right, we're going to put it this way just to keep these things separate. And once we've simplified things like this, again, this shape here can also be used to encapsulate this slightly tapered off shape. Similar thing I've done with the torso of the human body just before. We can turn this. This is not too hard. Maybe a couple days or weeks of studying perspective, but again, how long does the stream usually go? Very good question. I'll get back to you once we're done. No. Problem is we haven't timed this yet, so this might take the full Drink and Draw Thursday stream time until 9:30. Might be over a little bit earlier or a bit later, but we're aiming for 9:30. That is sorry. That's a very Berlin-centric view of things. That would be in 2 hours. Sorry, that would have been a much easier guesstimate. So we're going to take a break in 45 minutes or something, 20-minute break, and then continue until 21:30. I'm not sure if I have enough material to fill this time, but I think I can get there. We'll see. For those that have been around, we tried this similar hand workshop last week during the online version of the Playgrounds Festival, which was woefully cut short when the internet wasn't agreeing with us. Usually very stable. That time, very unfortunate timing and booted us. Anyway, we're here now. We're doing this. This is going to work beautifully. I'm just totally jinxing it right now. Sorry. Anyway, shapes. We have our rectangle, and again with simple principles from perspective. Again, simple in principle, but could be difficult to learn. So don't be discouraged if applying this is not going too smoothly at first. We can say, okay, this thing is maybe slightly tilted in space, and we're dealing with a box that we can look through to, right? We can draw the signs that we cannot see. Very important to do. Even in like the most simple studies, we do like still lives or things on your desk. If you understand how things look on the other side, you understand how they can turn, and that then facilitates an understanding of 3D form. If you only ever draw the sides that you can see, your brain might want to jump to just looking at something and then drawing only that without doing the process of understanding, trying to think around the form. So doing this, very good practice. Can really recommend it. So okay.
The screen froze already?
Oh,
oh, okay.
Okay.
I thought it's like, what's
All right.
going on again?
Yes. Sorry for those. Yep. So we need to get this out, right? This was bugging me all week, and I'm glad we got the opportunity to actually do this again. Yeah. Sorry, I just got the message, like the little whisper in my ear that something froze, and then I heard the word froze. I'm so scared. But all right, yeah, we got this. All right. So yeah, first big shape. This one here, number 1. We have number 2, 3, and 4 to deal with. This is the simplest one. Then this one here, kind of the same thing. You can actually continue this one following the laws of perspective. Speaking of which, let's talk about a trick that is a bit weird at the start. It's not a trick, it's just basic construction, but if you deal with foreshortening, meaning that something comes towards you and is bigger on the side that's facing you than in the one that's facing away from you, you deal with an issue with proportion. Like with this, we have this thing where, okay, we have 50% of this hand being the fingers and 50% of this hand being... I'm missing this word actually before I continue. The palm. I'm an idiot. Okay. Palm of the hand. Cool. The palm of the hand. And we want to put this into perspective, but with like the hand essentially going like this. You can see if I do this, the light isn't too perfect, but you can probably follow this. My fingers are bigger essentially than the palm of my hand, or they appear larger. And if you want to have the same effect on a drawing, it could be difficult to nail down exactly the 50% point in perspective. And the trick you do is, if you have a rectangle, what you can do is you draw diagonals from one corner to the other. If I could aim, then you get the middle point. This is precisely 50%. It's math. Don't ask me how it works. I just know it does. And this also works in perspective, which is very neat. So if you have like a vanishing point, and then you draw your let's call this top, bottom. So here we have our top, and here we have our we went for our bottom. If you do these diagonals again, you get something like this, like where these two cross. The Photoshop's not agreeing with me. That is in perspective the meeting point, like the middle point of these two. So depending on how you do this, might be more or less extreme, but this is a trick that you can use to find this point right here. If you want to do a very correctly drawn hand, this becomes intuitive after some time. So just keep doing it. It'll ingrain itself after a while. Anyway, so we have the second shape, but we need these tapering off ends. We can draw this in, and then put that into perspective, and we get the shape as well. With these, same thing. This is essentially really just another square where we cut from essentially. Let's do it in practice. Where it's a square, and we cut from this point, from the outer point towards the middle, and then in perspective we go back, get this part, and with that we have the what's it called, ball of the thumb ball, which means we only need like the two last joints of the thumb. And with that, it might be preferable to draw essentially a cylinder on top of that. All right, and with that we have an arrangement of somewhat simple forms that we can then turn in space to get the basic lay-in, so the form that contains our drawing for our hands. So, for example, this one too. Taper it off. All right, with that we can work. So we got our proportions, we understand roughly how form works, and we're going to talk about function and gesture in a bit. But this is the breakdown that we need to actually continue. But with this, we already know a lot about drawing in a live drawing setting, for example. Because in a live drawing setting, you want to keep your details where you want to put your focus. And usually, let's say in 97.3% of the time, you want to put that where the face is, because that's where people want to look, that's how we identify people. We're social creatures, we want to see a face. You don't want to put it on a hand. But what happens with a hand, if you've drawn enough hands, you realize, oh, there's a lot of lines that you need to do to actually draw a hand. And if you don't think about that and try to get all the details in, draw all the fingers, then you have considerably more lines where the hands are than where the face is, right? You start drawing, and then you have like an outline, and then there's like 1 knuckle and 2 knuckles and 3 knuckles, and it just continues like that, and you have even more lines for all these fingers, and just keeps piling on all these lines, right? It's just so much compared to something simple as an eye, maybe. And a way to get rid of all this detail and still imply there's a hand that we're dealing with here is if we simply do this form thing. So instead of drawing all these fingers, maybe we just use the lay-in. So we have the basic proportions, we do a breakdown, and this could already be enough, right? We can work all these details in later, and it might be smarter than trying to do this right away, like right when we get to drawing the hand. That's a lot about like drawing economy that this workshop isn't about, but this is just form, right? This is not quite probably good disclaimer, this is not quite the squares that I've drawn. They're in there. I can put them in. Like I was thinking about this when I was drawing. The tapered off shape is essentially here, but there's still form considerations in this, right? I was mostly thinking more about round organic forms when it came to this, but
And also it's more like a shape, right?
Yeah.
You drawing the silhouette of the hand, basically.
I'm drawing the silhouette of the hand, but with a form consideration.
Yeah.
So it's actually a good point. Something I haven't like heard people talk about too much, but maybe that's just my education. Actually, let's leave these here. So I've drawn a shape. That's true. Like on the surface level, I've drawn a shape, right? There's just outlines. But what's happening subconsciously, I'm actually thinking about the cylinder that lies underneath, even though I'm not drawing all of that. That's something I refer to as multitasking, where there are certain processes that you're doing simultaneously as you're doing another. So I'm drawing an outline, but I'm thinking about form and maybe anatomy if I'm really concentrating on that, because that stuff is hard. But yeah, what was the point I was trying to make? Because I'm not trying to draw just a shape. I'm trying to get a nice looking shape in the end, but there's always the form consideration. There's always this thought, okay, if I want to go over this, I'm thinking about, okay, this is definitely facing this way and it's going away from this point, right? This is the consideration I'm making as I draw this. I'm not showing all the form underneath, because at that point it becomes way too busy if I keep like constructing things. Might be difficult. Same thing with these fingers, by the way. Same thing. These are still cylinders that are facing away from this point. It's like a joint here that could be a sphere, and I could like put like a cross contour. This is literally not cross contour, but like an explanatory line to explain that, yeah, this is like coordinates. This is going across the form like on the sphere. So this is facing this way. Anyway, yeah, with form / shape, that is defining form, you can get the idea across that there is a hand without having to draw every single detail about a hand. And the things that keep or that inform your audience, your viewer, that okay, this is a hand, are mainly proportion and some form. Everything else, like let's leave gesture out of this for now, but like function, which would be anatomy, we're going to get to that, is complementary. You don't need every single finger joint. You don't need to draw every single muscle to inform someone that, yes, you're looking at a human person, right? There's a threshold that you have to cross with really only just proportions and form. And someone looking at a hand or a person knows this is a person or a hand. This is not too tough to guess. This is where like one of the bigger misconceptions about drawing, that everything is in the details and the function of things, when it's really mostly in proportion and form, right? So you can pretty much quickly guess, okay, if I have also context really, if I have a sphere and then I draw something that has that is like a square underneath, you already have the context that, yeah, this is roughly about anatomy, people and hands, and okay, I might be able to start seeing a torso and hips and like legs and all these things once I keep drawing this. But there's a point when drawing this where you just naturally go, oh yeah, this is a person, right? There comes a point, and to find that one is like a
and then you're breaking up the like the basic forms more often with the proportions in mind, right? So you have more details in it, right?
You keep doing this, exactly, yeah. Thank you. You can keep doing this process, right? You can just layer on more and more forms. I mean, this is the example where okay, I have defined the palm, I have the wrist here, the thumb is in the background, and then I can just keep adding these fingers, right? That's something I can do. I can add more and more forms, and I can, if I really wanted to, we can go all the way in here and then add little details like fingernail, which we can also like embed and then have like actual overlaps to sell the form a bit better, and all these things, like get the knuckles in, all of this. We can keep doing this, but it's not necessary to guess, okay, this is a finger, because this already, I would say, gives enough information. Anyway, okay. All right. So we have form, we have proportion. Let's talk about the actual super interesting bit, which is the most exciting one to me at least. Let's talk about gesture, which is, to be fair, both very easy to talk about and then very difficult as well. Because if you go on the internet and you've been figure drawing for just a bit, this term is thrown about a lot. Like this is the term when it comes to figure drawing, at least in my mind. And if you listen to like different artists about the term gesture, you're going to get different answers and different descriptions. And I think that's a good thing, because gesture is this universal approach that you can take to figure drawing, because it's the most, at least to me, most interesting and most exciting one. Sorry, I'm beating about the bush. Gesture generally is movement, or movement between forms, or it's the flow of a pose, for example. It can be all these things. There's always something that is in motion, essentially, when it comes to gesture. Line of action, also a term that gets thrown about. Line of action is not gesture, but line of action can be a gesture. I think that's a very important distinction, because line of action, for those that have heard about this in the concept of animation, is the longest line that you can put through a pose. And gesture can be smaller motions as well. It's important to not mix these up like completely. But there
can be a line of action in the hand as well, right?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So what's the difference then between line of action and gesture?
Again, line of action is for example, okay, let's say we have a pose. Let's just take any pose.
Nice.
All right. let's talk about line of action pose. The line of action in this pose would be pretty easy to discern this.
Yeah, that's a line you already drew in there, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much a line I've already drawn in here. To exaggerate this, it will also go through the head, which I've cut off. But yeah, line of action from the foot out the head. This will be the line of action. But there's more going on. Like there's only this one line of action in this pose. Although I'm not an animator, there is one in the audience. Correct me. This is the terms that I've learned. But gesture can be more. Like there's also a gesture that goes out from here. This motion here is a gesture, and there is a gesture that goes this way, and then a distinct motion / gesture that goes this way. The line of action is essentially an instrument of hierarchy, where okay, this is the dominant motion. Everything else in this pose is subordinate to this, is underneath it, is being directed by your line of action. That's the big difference that I know. So you want every other motion to essentially stress this line of action by having this one go this direction. So yeah, the weight is being put here. Everything else needs to essentially go to this point to put pressure on this. The hands are, they're not necessary for this.
Okay, all right.
But they're still subordinate to this. I don't want any other bigger motion because it might confuse the pose. But if this person was, doing like a like spread your wings out kind of thing, there could be a second line of action. I'm not quite sure how to categorize this, but again, another big motion. Though weight-bearing lines are usually the interesting ones because they dictate how everything else in the body actually behaves. Actually, this hip should be tilted this way. Yeah. Good.
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry.
Flap your wing. All right. Anyway, gesture of the hand. Let's actually talk about this. This can be used very quickly with laying in the hand very quickly as well. If you look at your hand and you fold your thumb in, I'm not sure if I can do this. Let's go from this side. This is basically like one shape that tapers off. Like there's not much that goes beyond the width of your wrist. When it comes to the palm, it just goes slightly wider, and then it tapers off towards your fingers. So you can use this because the motion of the wrist isn't too extreme if I do this, right? This is a curve and a curve that I can draw. And this isn't this means that if I just draw something like this, for example, let's see, I can do my cutoff points and say, okay, this is where I cut off for the wrist, this is where I cut off for the palm, and this is maybe where I cut off for the fingers, the thumb being folded in, though since I'm drawing this, I don't need to do this. I can essentially draw the thumb from this point. So I use the same measurements I used before, where, okay, the bones originate towards the wrist, okay, but like the webbing in between your thumb and your hand, it kind of, I actually need to see myself for this. It kind of splits off like from your index and then has like a slope towards your thumb. So that's something you can use as a gesture. This is not a real motion in theory, but still, this is a connection between forms, a flow between forms that we can use. So same thing the other way, really. So look at your hand, look at your thumb from the wrist, like one line that goes out from there. So same thing, from the wrist we go this way. And then for some other forms we have our thumb, we have our index, and then we can put in the other fingers as we wish. So we can use that in different poses, we can use that with different motions. There's of course some limitations to this. At some points this stops working, obviously. When you look at your wrist from a side view, it just as like a right angle. So that's where that kind of stops. / you just need to be a bit more extreme with your angles, I guess, where, okay, let's say this is right here, right in the background. So say for the wrist we use a cylinder, and our motion is very extreme this way. We want our hand to rest on the table flat, for example. I'm gesticulating here and you can't see it, sorry. So we have palm of the hand and then the tapering off part, and we have, which we learned, okay, this thing comes from the wrist and like from the index finger. So yeah, we can use the same kind of motion, the same kind of theory, at least about gesture, to draw something as extreme as a hand being bent 90 degrees from the wrist. That also works. If you're very flexible, you can go beyond 90 degrees. We're trying this right now and see. I can't. Like, this is the 90 degrees is the most for me. But yeah. I knew someone in what was the preschool, really, who could bend like his wrist all the way back so his fingers would touch his forearm. It was insane. Like, it was like a 180 degrees bent.
Is that even, I don't know, is that normal?
That is...
It's not normal, right?
I don't know if that's... I don't think it's... No, I don't think it's... I swear, this is probably something you can look up on Wikipedia.
No way.
I saw it with my own eyes. Anyway, fun things happen with bones, and we're going to talk about that too. So, yeah, we can use gesture to essentially connect our forms in a way that makes sense for the anatomy that is underneath. And that's what gesture is really about. It's a way to structure everything underneath it. So the same way that we can use a line of action to give our drawing or our gesture a hierarchy, we can use gesture to give everything that follows it a hierarchy. So when it comes, I'm sorry to do this so backwards, but this is important to actually, we get to know our tools, which are our forms, and then we learn how to use these tools, which would be gesture. And then using these masterfully, I guess, would be our anatomy, our details, or our function. Going to get to that eventually too. So when it comes to the hierarchy, I would recommend going for the gesture first, right? So we have a motion, well, pretty much like that one. So our motion would be, okay, we're going to go this way, all right? And then we're going to take this motion, we're going to apply form to it. Though, looking at this, it doesn't need to be just this. And I wouldn't recommend just thinking about it in these simple lines, because then you get into stick figure drawing, and stick figure isn't exactly gesture, but I think that would make this workshop explode if I go into that, so just leave it at that. But this is another gesture we can have for the thumb, for example. And then again, we take our gesture that we have, and then we apply form to it. So we use our form, which would be, for example, this cylinder for the hand, and this box cylinder-ish kind of thing for the palm of the hand. And then we kind of messed up that where the fingers would be, but that's still fine. Make a different hand out of it. So we apply these two boxes, and apply the other form that we had with the thumb, where we have this kind of tapering for the ball of the thumb. And for the thumb, we just use a couple cylinders, and then we can go into essentially, I guess we could refine the form a bit to make it a bit more hand-like, where we go with the tapering end of this. So we use this, and this is our form, and then we can, let's see, then we can take our form and make this maybe a bit more see-through. And then we talk about our structure, the last, come on, our structure. And that's when we actually get into the nitty-gritty of what is a hand. A hand is fingers, a hand is webbing in between fingers, a hand is skin. We're going to talk about that a bit more in depth later. But essentially what I've done before, we're going to draw the webbing, we're going to draw knuckles, we're going to draw individual fingers, we're going to draw individual joints, we're going to draw fingernails, all the small details that all make up a hand. And then on top of that, you can start rendering form, you can start rendering different materials, you can start applying highlights and all the fun stuff. But for all of that, I would recommend considering like these 3 steps, because they're a good way to structure your thinking and your process, essentially. And eventually, I mean, you've seen me do it a couple times, you can multitask by essentially thinking about gesture and drawing form already with a gesture in mind. And then that's when drawing becomes magic, essentially, right? If you look at like the grandmasters of drawing or painting, they just start at a point and they just go from there. Like Kim Joo-gi is a really good example who thinks about this stuff. If you listen to his interviews, he talks about this, but he only draws like the final product, essentially. He skips gesture and form, these considerations as a building block. He just draws straight structure already. Super interesting. And if you think about it that way, it becomes still very interesting and daunting, but also somewhat understandable, where, okay, I know how to study this now if I want to learn an approach like that. Anyway, all right. Is it break time already? No, we've been live for 40. Yeah, still some time. I'm just worried I'm going to run out of material to talk about. That's my bigger concern, so I'm wishing for the pause. Anyway, all good. I got a lot more stuff to talk about. It's just not sure if I have like another 90 minutes in me. That's my concern.
I mean, we can do some kind of hangout and just draw and paint and whatever.
Yeah. Towards the end, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about gesture and form, and we've touched a little bit upon structure. Are there any questions when it comes to gesture? Because I hate going back to that. I would hate going back to that.
Thanks.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's a shame. All right. There's one strange hand. Just realized. Oh, that's.
Well, it's just for presentation purpose, so.
Yeah, it still bugs me. That's better.
It's a horrible hand.
That's a very, very, very bad hand. Bad hand. Anyway, I guess a couple things about hand weirdness when it comes to a couple things. So what I've done in this earlier drawing is I made a straight cut and said these are flat, which they are not. You have this thing with your hand where, okay, your middle finger is the longest finger among the 4, not counting the thumb. Index and ring finger roughly the same length, and your little finger is the smallest one. The same thing happens with your bones. If you look at the bones of your hand, we can use the same matrix we used before. Same, I guess this should be a bit longer. Same builder where we cut through this long rectangle, and then we quickly build up.
What was that?
I think that was some program. Doesn't matter. So yeah, palm of the hand, and then our thumb. When it comes to the bones, they have the same kind of structure. There's essentially a wave going through your hand. So let's take a different color for this actually to highlight this. You have this thing going on, right? You have this going up and then going down, going up and down. You have the same thing going through all the different joints of your hand. And again, you have the best example at hand. Just look at your own hand and realize, okay, same thing happens down here. albeit less extreme. Like the knuckle of your little finger is a bit lower than the knuckle of your middle finger, and the knuckles of your, depends on how you flex it, I guess. The other two knuckles of the ring and index finger roughly the same height, varies. And the same thing happens with the knuckles, like going from the first joint of your fingers. Same thing, the same kind of wave. And then the same thing going up again. And you can essentially structure it from there. Where, okay, this is one joint, two joint, second joint, third joint, and it keeps doing that essentially. Where, okay, these are the joints of the ring finger. These are the joints of middle finger, sorry, joints of the ring finger, and then the joints of the little finger, the knuckles respectively down here. Another interesting thing that you can observe in figure drawing as well, which is something that's usually neglected, so I'd love to talk about this. If you look at a person standing, say you have someone standing right in front of you, and you look at the way that their limbs are bent in a way, you realize that if you look at the bones, specifically the thigh, for example, the thighs go towards the body middle, and the legs do a similar thing where, okay, they go slightly in. It depends on gender, build, and so forth, but generally the legs turn towards the inside of your body. If you have like the body middle, this is where both the thighs go, especially the femur bone goes like in this direction, and then your shins do something similar, which while the bone is straight, there's a rim towards the front of the bone that has this shape. And your fingers do something similar. If you look at your fingers, they're not perfectly straight. There's like a small and fine detail that's something that can really make a drawing in the end. Your fingers tend to bend towards the middle as well. If you draw like a straight line down the middle of your finger, your little finger is going to go towards that, your index finger is going to go towards that, your ring finger most likely is going to go towards that, and then depending on the person, the middle finger is completely straight or also turns slightly towards like a middle point. I'm sure if you can see this with my hand, but my middle finger is almost straight, but my other fingers have like a slight bend to them. Same with my little finger, slight bend. Something the body tends to do. I'm actually not sure why the hand does it. I guess it's something, if you grab, it goes towards like a point, so it's a lot more precise. With the whole body, it's a balance thing where, okay, you need something that goes out and in so that you can actually bear weight on something. Same with the spine. If you've ever looked at the spine from the side, this somewhat relates to hands, right? I'm going to talk about hands in 30 seconds roughly again, so this should be fine. Your spine goes out, goes in, and then lumbar region goes out again. And then for the sacrum goes in again. Legs, same thing, they go in and then go out again. So this is all weight bearing essentially. All right. So again, fingers, different thing, but similar design principle essentially that you can keep in mind. Also interesting if you go for gesture, because you can essentially, let's see, what can we do with this? It's like an overdramatic hand where you point. So you have like a right, you can do this kind of gesture, and then the finger dramatically pointing, not straight, but maybe with this curve. So you have a figure drawing, very, very handy way to give the rough outline of a hand, and still have some lively parts to that. All right, what to talk about then? Guess I want to keep the anatomy part separate from everything else. So if there are any questions pertaining like the principles of gesture in the hand and the principle of form in the hand, I'm going to rack my brain and think if I forgot something. This would be the time now, because I want to have like this clear cut between talking about things before we get into a bit more detailed stuff, a bit more things to make things really look like a finger, or make skin look like skin, like in a functional way, not in a rendery way. Though, actually going back to form, something cool you can do if you, let's go back to like the first thing we talked about, but alright, here we go. If you have something as simple as a cylinder, for example, and you know how to draw this, and you then learn how to render or how light works on a cylinder, you can do that to a hand as well. We're not going to get into like a full hand rendering, but just know that you can apply the basic principles of lighting to a cylinder, and then you can later apply it essentially to a fully grown hand as well, which is something very nifty. So with this, you have your highlight on top, you have your core shadow in the middle, you have your bounce light here, you have some occlusion below that, and you apply that to a cylinder. That means you can also apply it to a finger essentially, because you can structure your finger like a knuckle, like a more like a sphere. Your actual fingers more like cylinders, and then render light and shadow accordingly. Okay, so we'd have this, and then everything below that would be in shadow.
Ja. Okay, solange der Ton ist okay ist, dann ist gut.
We're having some dropped frames, I apologize. I don't know what that is. That might be my PC, it might be our internet. Ever since I moved to Berlin, I haven't been able to stream like very fluidly. So, yeah, sorry about that.
Damn you, Berlin.
Damn you, Berlin. Actually, I've no complaints really about Berlin, so yeah. Don't kick me out, please. So yeah, rendering fingers, all very much similar principles that apply. And once you get the basics down, implying things like light and shadow and form for a hand in a light drawing environment, for example, becomes very intuitive and quick. But it takes quite a bit of time to again multitask all of this at the same time. If you're constructing everything, it's going to take a while. If you're quick with gesture, then you might be able to be very quick with everything that follows gesture, like your form and your structure, because you have something that gives your drawing a hierarchy. All right, I think we can take a break here.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, let's say 20 minutes. What was it?
Yeah.
All right. Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm going to have a
make a nice typo.
Yeah.
Break. Yeah.
Burke.
All right, we're doing a 25-minute break. It's a 20-minute break actually. So we're back at 8 p.m. at 28 minutes after 8 p.m. Yeah, that's the German time. It's 8 p.m. But yeah, I think people will understand.
Here we go.
If they're not German.
We're back at 2028 Central European Standard Time.
Yeah.
There we go.
All right, perfect.
Awesome.
Let's try to make Bayer like people can hear. Bayer.
Yes, let's mute ourselves.
I mean, it's just maybe we can make a end stream. Not end stream. I mean, end recording first, right? We don't have to record that.
Enable. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first one was actually 50 minutes long. It was, good time. Anyway, so we covered a lot of interesting and important things about getting things done quickly. Let's talk about getting things done efficiently and to a point I guess. So and a different way to study things too, because we can use all these principles to enhance our visual library, which is also a term that gets thrown about quite a lot. Visual library essentially means like a mental library of things that you can draw without having to resort to reference necessarily, or that can help you with your reference essentially. And one of these things that we essentially already talked about this, if you break down complex things like a hand down into your simple forms, then you can draw these without having to resort to very specific reference. You can then mix and match your reference, or you can just draw things out of your head depending on how deep your understanding goes, right? The understanding of how gesture works in conjunction with your... Actually, I should have probably shown that, okay, this is the movement that we were going for. This is more means that we can essentially play jazz with our drawings, right? We don't need to conform to any strict guidelines that a reference would give us. Let's see if I can show you. If I can. This is some reference I plucked from probably the worst example I could have picked, but let's take it anyway. Example from Pinterest. So in terms of gesture, very simple really, right? You can see, okay, there's this movement, almost straight, and then for the thumb goes out in this direction and then bends around again. So we have kind of a
draw it so quick?
just perfectly rendered in like a second. But yeah, our gesture is really just this one straight line, and then we can build on top of that. And I don't need to, and this is the interesting part about studying essentially, if I want to draw this hand, I don't need to copy it, because copying would mean that I draw what I see. I do the work of a printer or a scanner, depending on what I want to do. So for example, if I were to copy this, I would look, okay, so the outline here is like this. So I draw this kind of thing, and I very carefully then draw, for example, into this little finger, and I draw all of these other lines, and then maybe I keep actually going with the outline, for example, and eventually I would have a hand. That would be the end result, right? But what I'm doing here, for example, I'm just going with the outline. I'm just drawing a shape, I guess, to go back to that discussion. I'm just drawing shapes without any consideration for why the shape is the way it is. And then I go around with the thumb, whatever. I copied this now. But what I can do with the understanding of gesture and form is I can take this form, this gesture, and then draw my forms that I want to have following this gesture. For example, I have the cylinder slightly bent, like a motion towards this way, and then I have the palm of the hand as this somewhat box-shaped form right there. I have this protruding kind of form for my thumb. And then I have my fingers, which if you look from the side, obviously if the fingers are bent, this would be the palm of the hand. The knuckles would be here, and our fingers curve around. This is what happens there. So I need to consider that, okay, this actually goes up. There's a point where there's a bend, and this bend then goes back around and curves back in. So I have essentially a block here that curves in, and with my thumb, that one actually goes up in this direction and then towards here. Okay. Why is this important? Because again, if I break this down, I can then turn it. I don't need to rely on this kind of reference. I can use this reference of where the fingers go because I can see this, and then draw it from a different angle because I understand the form. So if I wanted to draw this like from the top, I could do the same thing. I know there's a cylinder here that I can essentially pull up, and then I know that the palm of the hand would sit on top of here, and would go in this direction. And I know that my fingers would then go, would bend over and back in, roughly. And my thumb would go towards this angle. It is like the thumb would bend towards the middle of the hand. We're going to talk about the anatomy behind that and some fun facts on thumbs in a bit, because hands are fascinating. And the thumb then goes like this. And then I have still studied this, I've used my reference, but I have applied it in a completely different way because I understand the forms that pertain to this reference, to this hand, to this specific situation of the hand. Or you get the ball of the thumb in there, define like the outside a bit more. I could then go in and have like considerations of, okay, you can see that the little finger is definitely, oh dear, this is getting spooky. Anyway, the little finger is a bit lower than the others, and I can make these considerations then separately, where okay, this one should probably be a bit higher up and so forth, but it goes into something I want to cover in a bit anyway, so we're going to leave it at that. We have the form, we have the gesture, we have the basic shape. It's recognizable, I hope, as a fist, and I've hopefully made my point. But yeah, all right, so we've covered that. But yeah, let's talk about how this goes back to this whole analytical drawing kind of thing, because we have now essentially with this approach disseminated what the forms are and what they're doing, and you can actually do proper studies with this. So for example, you can make this consideration, okay, what actually allows that for me to do when I draw? What can I learn about the hand that I can then apply in varying different ways? A very important thing is that if you want to invent a pose, you need to know how far you can go with it. It's this old adage of in order to break the rules, you must first learn them. Yeah, because breaking a rule that you're not sure is a rule is just confused, essentially. Like if there's a no loitering sign, or for example, there is no loitering sign and you loiter, you're not being a rebel, you're just being confused, right? It's just that's an issue.
2020.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. There's no, you need to be upsetting something or to break a rule, otherwise it just comes across as weird. So one thing you can do with this approach is you can study the confines of a hand, and you can lock that into a system you can understand. And the system is most easily identified and applied by using simple forms. What am I actually talking about? All right. So with this, if you have, let's take this conundrum actually, this one right here. You have a finger that is curved in, that's bent in, more like this. And it can also be extended, right? So you have the first joint, the second joint, which is shorter, and the third one, which is shorter still, and that can then curve in. And I've defined now the range of motion this finger has, right? It can curve in and can extend. That's what it does. And your finger cannot do much else, because your finger has what's known as a hinge joint, which is something that can only really go in two directions. Like it can extend and it can, what's the other word? Contract. That's the two motions that the finger can do. That's also the only things that a muscle can do, right? If you muscles have two things they can do. They can relax and they can contract. And because of that, if you have, for example, your upper arm,
Lars, the
yes.
sound was just gone for a second.
So it was gone for a second. Were you back though?
Yeah, it's back.
It's back. Okay, cool. No worries then. If you have your arm, can I? Oh, I have so many layers. Yeah, there's 1 second. Okay, found it immediately. Let's get rid of this. Let's see where I actually was. That's the bigger issue, I guess. Newest one, huh? Yeah. All right. So you can actually. There's a poor gesture when it comes to what I wanted to actually explain here.
So loud.
So we have. Why are you being chaotic? Very loud. So we have our arm that is our biceps, essentially, that is contracting, right? The lower arm is being pulled up. Also something very interesting, while this part is moving, a muscle in this area is doing the work, which is going to be very important with our fingers in a bit, because fingers are weird, because they are the very extremes of your extremities. But yeah, so that's one thing your arm can do, and then your arm can also relax. So, which is when this muscle is not pulling. Instead, you have the arm just dangling loosely. All right. So same thing with the elbow joint. That one is also essentially binary. It can do two things. It can go one direction or the other. That's it. And you can study this and analyze this by essentially drawing this thing. For example, if you wanted to, the bone itself is somewhat, I wouldn't say abstract, but the shape and form isn't immediately obvious, because there is a lot going on with both your ulna and the radius. But this is roughly what it looks like. But in function, it's we can ignore this one, like the small one. We can essentially say, okay, if we want to study this and study its function, what we're dealing with is really something more like something like this, where you then put the other bone in. Then you realize, okay, this can only go one way because it can only swing in this direction afterwards, right? That's the range of motion it has. There's also essentially, if you want to look the other way, which I'm not exactly going to draw, but there's a point in your ulna that prevents your arm from hyperextending, which again depends on the person. My elbow just stops working after 180 degrees, like my arm would only go this far, but there are people that can voluntarily or involuntarily go a bit more this way. That's called hyperextension. You see that a lot in ballerinas and gymnasts. And drawing fun fact, if you deal with hyperextension, be very careful how you draw this, because if you draw it the wrong way, the arm looks broken. There's something very interesting going on with the gesture and the anatomy that needs some very careful fine-tuning, otherwise it looks weird. So as an artist, that's the point where you can say, okay, I'm going to make a decision here. I'm going to not draw this, for example. I'm going to not draw it hyperextended, because hyperextension looks weird in a still frame. It looks very natural if it's in motion, but in a still frame it can look very strange. So as an artistic decision, you can say, nope, not going to draw it. I'm going to confuse my audience. I'm not going to do this. So that's a freedom you have. So yeah, so this goes these two ways. So that's right here would be, I just gave it a name. What was it? Damn it. This kind of joint is a hinge joint. The hand has two kinds of joints, and those are very interesting because they're both unique for the human body. And only your hands have those, unless there's someone who studied medicine in the chat, please correct me. I know only of these two instances. The other types of joints you have are a ball joint, which really is a ball that then extends into something else, and it allows the corresponding bone to essentially rotate freely, like in all kinds of directions. If you willed it that way, like it can go this way, it can go this way. How do arrows work? Okay, this way. That's what a ball joint can do, right? A hinge can only do this. I guess this is more. It can only do this, going one way or the other. Ball joint can do pretty much everything, aside from obviously the part where it locks. And those are the most common ones. Let's not get into everything. Let's go to the ones that actually pertain to our hand. If you look at your hand and you move it, you realize, okay, there's quite a bit of movement here, right? It can do the hinge thing of going like front, back, extend, and flex. But it can also go somewhat to the side and somewhat to the right. And there's also some minor, which by the way, like the actual rotation that you have here, that's something that has something to do with your radius. Let's not talk about this. But there's some extra range of movement your hand has, but it's not technically a ball joint. It's called I actually forgot, and I'm sorry. But what happens, you have these two bones.
It's totally fine, Lars.
Sorry. So much for my preparation. It's like an ovaloid joint, I think. It has a very weird name, and I rarely talk about hands, so I'm sorry, I'm missing the information right now. I'm gonna look it up eventually. But what happens is you have two bones that connect from your elbow joint to your hand. Your ulna and the radius. The ulna is the part that's actually the elbow, and it's very thick towards the elbow because it's very much load bearing, and the radius is very thin towards the elbow, and they change as they go towards your hand. Essentially, you have stylized, obviously. This would be your this one, by the way, funny bone. This is your elbow. The ulna essentially sits here.
By the way, Lars, it's called a radiocarpal joint.
Radiocarpal joint, interesting.
Yeah.
I know that's probably the proper anatomical name.
Yeah.
I know there's a different name for the form and shape it has, but it doesn't matter. Okay, radiocarpal joint. Let's go with that, because with
never heard of it before. I've got to be honest.
I mean, it makes sense because you're like it's the joint that's made by the radius and I guess by the carpal bones. Yeah, let's talk about carpal tunnel in a bit. That's a thing that's fun. So yeah, you have your radius, your ulna. Getting confused right now, and your radius, which is thinner and then gets thicker, and then your hand. Let's not draw every single hand bone because I would just be here all evening. Getting very much confused right now. Anyway, let's not talk about the details here because I'm confusing myself. But the bones here essentially make up not a ball joint, but like an ovaloid shape. Where okay, this is kind of what happens. Where okay, we have almost like a suction cup. Where okay, if I wanted to go over this.
You can check out Lars's artworks on Instagram. Do you have an Instagram, Lars?
I have an Instagram, but it's not very well maintained. But I swear I'm going to get to that.
I swear.
I swear.
I swear on my mom.
It's mostly illustration and figure drawing.
Portfolio or something?
It is also linked.
Curious.
It is also linked through my Instagram, but it's very much an up to date. There's an ArtStation link in my. Thanks for asking, by the way. There's an ArtStation link in my Instagram bio.
Which is Lars Weiler.
Yeah, that's it. It's my name. If you can spell it out for me, it would be very nice because my
I'll do that.
My name has so many different pronunciations in English. It's probably confusing. W's, am I right?
Lars Weiler.
Yeah. So yeah, this ovaloid shape essentially means that there's not a full range of rotation that can happen there, but there is just enough wiggle room that your hand can do the things it does. And the other interesting part, and let's talk about evolution for a second, is the thing that your thumb can do. If you look at your thumb, actually let's look at a finger first. Your fingers really just do one thing, right? They bend and do this. But there's a bit more motion when it comes to like your knuckle joint. That's a bit more free when it comes to movement. But your thumb is especially crazy because your thumb has the same kind of range of movement, but it can also essentially like pivot a bit. And that's the thing that makes humans so interesting because we have opposable thumbs, right? We can do this movement, which apes cannot really do. Apes are pretty much just restricted to this, but we can do the full range of motion with our thumb. It's called a saddle joint as far as I'm informed, which essentially means that you have two shapes that both kind of look like this, like your stereotypical bone joint, essentially. So you have this here and this there, essentially. And you have two of these that then can go on top of each other. That's the rough shape of what's happening with thumb joint. And that means that these two have this kind of motion where they can pivot a bit and they can do the full hinge thing. And that's, as far as I know, that bone is unique only to your thumb. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
What about your big toe?
What? No. That one...
I mean, it's kind of related, you know?
It's kind of related. And something interesting about, I guess toes. That's a misconception. This is kind of an anecdote, but it's a misconception I've had for the longest time that your feet are kind of boring, right? If you're a monkey, it's amazing because you have like hands for feet. That's so cool. You can climb with that. It's really awesome. And then after a while, after studying it up, feet are amazing because you have a different kind of joint in your foot. That is not unique to the foot, but that is very, very important for your foot. It's called I'm going to make up a word. Please do your own research. Kind of rusty, I just realized. Essentially a contact joint, where usually when you have a bone, it is connected through muscles and sinews and all kinds of other tissues. With a contact joint, it's bone on bone with the barest minimum of other tissues to actually connect them. So all they can do is barely slide against one another. So would be the hinge. It's really just more like this. You have this kind of joint in your clavicle, and you have it in your foot, and you have it with every single mini bone that you have in your foot. If you look at a foot, like anatomy-wise, let's go into feet. Why not? You have your shin bone coming in, then you have your heel is like one part, and then there's like a myriad of bones in this area before it goes into the phalanges and then goes into the actual toe bones. And this whole thing, like where it gets really messy, where there's like a bunch of different bones, it's all like contact joints. And what that means is these are shock absorbing. So when you put your foot down, that's where all the stress from the impact goes, because every single joint there, like all these contact joints, they absorb the shock. And that's why humans are amazing at running and pretty much the best at it, like endurance running. We're not very fast. We can run for literal days if we wanted to, and are trained. Hooray, modern world, I guess. But that's what the whole evolution came down to. Like we are endurance runners, and this specific configuration of our bones makes it possible.
Damn, it's super interesting.
People are asking for a feet workshop now, Lars.
Sure.
You made it.
Feet are fun. I never realized that, but feet are amazing fun, because it's like this. It's kind of like this forbidden fruit in a way, where feet.
You're one of these guys.
Oh yes, totally no. And now it's on record. Actually, no, it's on record, but the record is on my PC. So I mean it in a way.
Someone is asking, where do you get all this anatomical knowledge from?
Let me pimp a book.
Oh wait, this guy.
Oh,
Mr. Skeleton.
That's Stan. I was told. Hi, Mom. That was relayed to me. This guy is called Stan, apparently. I mean, anatomical knowledge, it's all on the internet, but there's like one book that I'm just going to pimp. I'm not being sponsored by this person, but this is like the best anatomy book that I've ever come across, because it just talks about everything. Yeah, I guess I just leave it at that. It's Figure Drawing, Design and Invention by Michael Hampton. It's pretty much, it's not quite the same logic that I've been following in here, like the way to break things down mostly, but roughly related. One thing that you realize if you delve really deep into draftsmen that deal with anatomy and stuff like that, they all talk about the same terms. Slight variations, certain different focus on certain parts, but there is a lot of overlap. And Michael Hampton, to me, was always the best one that broke down muscles and bones and anatomy into simple terms and how they moved and all this kind of stuff. That, and there's like a bunch of beautiful drawings in that book, which are very, very good at explaining what he's talking about.
Who else would you recommend looking at?
Oh, there's so many. There's also Carl Gnas, who has a YouTube channel, which is Carl Gnas Studios, which has like a mini workshop on figure drawing and how to use forms to draw humans, essentially. He's an animator well, he used to be an animator for Disney. He's now teaching at Disney and Pixar. He's really good. Stan Prokopenko of Proko on YouTube, amazing. I'm going to leave out so many people. I'm going to regret it. There's Kirk Shimoto from the Kirk Shop, who's also an absolutely wonderful draftsman. I don't think he has a book, but he has a YouTube channel and an Instagram that's absolutely wonderful. There's Mike Matesi, which I have to admit I haven't studied up enough, who is really mostly about gesture. Like if you want to get really deep into gesture, that's your man. I think anatomy-wise, there's also Steve Houston, who has a book. That one is like it's like a good self-teaching book because it has an actual course structure, which is very unique among books. I'm going to go through all my books right now.
No, I think it's let's give like
one more.
Two, yeah.
I don't know how to.
Don't forget Lars Weiler.
Yeah, no, don't. Don't forget about me, but no. I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'm just going to write it. It's Khan and then
Muftik.
Muftik?
I have no idea.
Oh yeah,
Muftik.
That's my problem. It might be Muftich.
I think.
I don't know.
Oh yeah, true.
Yeah, that's his name. He has a book called Figure Drawing for Concept Artists, and don't let that scare you. It's amazing for every kind of artist, because what this book does, and no other book does, it actually explains how to use figure drawing principles for design and illustration work. Because most of these books are essentially self-contained. They explain how to draw anatomy and how to draw a body, but they don't explain like how you study figure drawing to make it relate to your job, for example, because he made this reverse journey. Most of these draftsmen studied in an atelier and became amazing and then went into fine arts or illustration or design or whatever. Khan, from, if I remember correctly, was a concept artist first and then went to figure drawing workshops and realized, like in hindsight, what it all meant to him. So he was a professional first and then a figure drawing artist. So the book revolves around this reverse journey, which is really cool because it relates really well to someone who studies, but from the point of view of someone who knows how to learn for art. So very unique angle, amazing book, great reference in the book too. Yeah. Anyway, where was I?
We're talking about feet.
Feet. Yeah, let's not talk about feet. Let's talk about hands again. So we got this. All right. Yeah. What else is there? Before I move on to the whole structure bit. So we got the whole self-study thing, how to draw analytically. Let's talk a bit about some minor things not minor things, but like some nitty-gritty details when it comes to drawing hands. Let's say like a couple principles to make things 3D. Okay, we have our actual forms, the actual forms that we draw, but me being too careful, I've ignored something very important, which would be an overlap, right? This bone could sit on top of this. And if I were to draw this properly, I would have done this maybe in the first place, but I wanted to get the forms right. Oops. Okay. So we would have this kind of dichotomy where, okay, this is my outline. Let's see. And I would have an overlap here and an overlap here. Because this very clearly tells us that this one, at least here, is going over this one. You can get like a bit of shadow in here. Oh, that's a bad shadow. This. So this is the way it would sit on there. And overlaps are important, especially when it comes to hands, because fingers are difficult, right? There's let's do math quickly. There's 4 fingers with 3 joints each, so there's like 12 different forms and shapes that can partly somewhat overlap and do different things, right? So this becomes very difficult to actually govern once you go beyond the form stage. So overlaps can help to actually make things look nice and 3D as well, because telling one thing or telling your viewer that one thing is in front of the other is the way that you can create this illusion of depth. So let's talk about like the fingertips. Actually, now that I realize it, going back a bit to anatomy, because
Lars,
yeah.
could you, in the end of the workshop, post the links to the YouTube channels or the names into the chat?
Of course, yeah. Remind me.
Okay, awesome.
Remind
Yeah,
me.
I'll remind you.
Okay. Jeez.
Just keep it short, like the essentials,
Yeah,
like 5 each or
yeah.
something. Yeah.
Of course. There's also Glenn Wilper, which I forgot to talk about. There's so many. Could talk about them.
Just like 2 or 3 that you kind of like.
Let's do a book workshop where we just talk about books for an hour. Anyway.
Book review, yeah.
This is like a this is essentially something that holds true throughout most of your body, and it's super interesting. With fingers, it's a bit more complicated. If you have a system, let's say you have your shoulder, you have your tricep and your bicep as the upper arm, and you have whatever else comes up in terms of muscles in your arm. A system, like the shoulder and the bicep. The system directly above the one you want to talk about actually moves that one. The muscles in your shoulder move your upper arm, right? If you lift your arm, that movement is facilitated by the shoulder muscles, because these, I'm not sure if you can see this, so I'm going to draw it. If you have a neck and you have your shoulder muscles here, these are what's actually moving your upper arm, because this one here actually pulls in this direction up the upper arm. That's what it does. That's how almost every single muscle in the human body works, essentially, if you talk about these systems, right? The bicep, if you flex your bicep, it pulls in your lower arm. With the fingers, it's very interesting, because your fingers, and you can feel this for yourself, by the way, that's how you can recognize a fledgling anatomy artist. They keep touching themselves all over, all the time, because they want to feel muscles. It's weird. If you tightly grasp your lower arm and then wriggle your fingers, you realize, oh, there's movement in my lower arm. That's interesting. Every single muscle that moves your fingers is in your lower arm, and you really only feel tendons in your fingers. If you like hyperextend essentially your fingers back, you can see your sinews on the back of your hand, and these go all the way to your lower arm, and these sit all across your lower arm, and some even go back up to the upper arm, but let's not talk about that. But that's how your fingers are moved. So the whole system of the hand is essentially moved by your lower arm, and it's not like there's a muscle in your second finger joint that pulls your fingertip. No, it's one sinew, and then there's a lot of fine-tuning with the other muscle in the other direction. And one of the big reasons why like arm or hand prostheses are so difficult to make, because fingers are incredibly complex, and we are incredibly amazing beings for having such finely tuned tools on the ends of our hands, arms. But yeah, it's an absolute wonder to try and study. So yeah, that's an interesting bit about that. So there's essentially not much flexing in your hand. So when you draw a hand, there's not much muscle. There's barely any muscles in the hands that would be obvious of some kind. Like there's some in your thumb. There's something between for some minute movements, but the big movements of your fingers is dictated by the muscles in your lower arm, which also means, interestingly, we can talk about some more rhythms. We had some rhythms with the spine, if I can find the drawing again, where we have this continuous S curve essentially that goes through the body, right? Which is all the way to the bottom. I can actually use this to draw a human body, just going with rhythms, pretty much. Any case, this kind of rhythm also means if we take this one, there's almost always something that goes in the human body from hard to soft, essentially. It's something about weight bearing and actually having movement. For example, the best example probably, there's a lot of bones in your hips, logically, and a lot of bones in your rib cage, logically, right? There's all these different ribs. There is your stupid me. There's your I'm so bad. 1 second. I do have my dictionary. Sternum, thank you, dictionary. Your sternum and so forth. It's almost all bone. But in between the hips and in between the hips and the rib cage, there's really only muscle and fat. So like in between these two right here. Why is that? Because you need something that allows articulation. You need something that gives way when you, for example, bend your torso. Right? You need something that pinches in and then maybe can stretch on the other side, because these are rigid, whereas this is
soft.
not. Yeah, it's soft. So with the fingers, there's and actually let's talk a bit more about this. This goes throughout the entire body, and you can it's almost like a song. Like the head, mostly bone, right? Neck, mostly sinews, muscle, and so forth. Rib cage, mostly bone. Stomach, belly, whatever, mostly fat and muscle. Hips, mostly bone again. Thighs, while there's a really big bone in there, it's like tightly wrapped in muscles and fat. Then your kneecaps or your knees, essentially, almost all sinews and bone. And then kind of weird with the calves, because that's like at the front it's almost all bone, and then at the back it's all muscle. And let's not talk about feet, but essentially it's alternating between bones, muscles. With fingers, we have a similar thing going on like this, where okay, we have this basic animation principle here, right? If you study animation or interested in it, there's this principle called squash and stretch, where okay, we can bend this thing over, and there's going to be a squash here where the material pinches in because it's leaning over, and then there's a stretch on the other side where the material is being pulled taut. And you have a similar thing with your fingers, with the sinews and everything, because with fingers, the top of your fingers is pretty much always straight in a way. Like if you look at this and you pull it in, it's pretty much straight, save from the knuckles, but there's no flexing going on because there's really only a sinew that pulls it back. There's no muscle that can flex, right? With a bicep might go from being in like when it's only being held, might just look put the elbow here, might just look like flat surface. Once you pull it in, you pull it up, it might bulge, like there's suddenly a curve, and this one might actually be pulled so taut as well. With a finger, it's pretty much always going to be flat at the top. So finger straight, essentially. Let's draw this. Okay, it's going to have a flat surface here, and then round here. If you bend it, let's talk about a bent finger in a bit. It's going to be flat here, flat at the back, and then round on the inside, and then flat back down here again. All right, I've gotten way off track with the whole overlap thing. I'm sorry. But yeah, you have the finger pinching in on this side. You have the pinch here when you pinch your finger, where this is mostly fatty tissue. There's not much. I'm pretty sure there's no muscle. It's all fat and connective tissue, and that can pinch in. There's nothing that flexes there. It's just all soft. This is essentially the structure part of this whole thing, where we talked about gesture and proportions and form, and we've talked about function. Now we have structure going on, where okay, we're going to make things look like the thing it's made of, which is a very difficult way to say we're going to make things make sense, I guess. So yeah, we're dealing with sinews, which are going to generally be straights. We're going to deal with fat, which is generally going to be round and squishy. We're going to deal with muscle, which can do both of these things, which is interesting because muscles are fascinating. But yeah, let's go back to the whole overlap thing. If you have your finger turn curve in, because fingers, I'm not sure if I ever said that, but fingers can very well be represented by cylinders, right? And you can then, if you realize that there's this hinge thing going on, that the finger can curve. So I can give this a hard bend going down, but I can still represent this by cylinders, right? And then I can have this go back in this direction. And have maybe the finger still represented by a cylinder. And then it pinches in here, and pinches in there. Wraps around. The same principles that you would use when you would draw, if you were to draw cloth and cloth folds, would apply to skin. Obviously, skin is a bit more rubbery in a way. It's thicker. There's more things going on with connective tissue and underlying muscle and everything else. But it's the same principle. Like the same way I would draw this sack, I would treat skin roughly, at least to get the idea across. In figure drawing, getting the idea across is way more important than being accurate with your reference. In any case, let's say we have a finger. I'm running out of space. Where did I actually put this? Yeah, here. You have the whole overlap thing going on. If you wanted to draw the tip of a finger, which is not quite cylindrical anymore, right? As long as you're dealing with cylinders for fingers in between, like a knuckle joint could be a sphere connecting two cylinders. This would be a good representation of what's going on with like the sinew, which would go essentially over here, connecting these and being attached to these and pulling them taut when needed. But it kind of falters when you deal with the tip of a finger, because the tip of a finger is curving in essentially. It's like going to a fine point, it tapers off. So how do you draw this like from a very basic standpoint? You draw your cylinder, and then you essentially say, okay, the top is flat, because we can make that assumption, we can make that judgment call as an artist, to make a distinction between fingers and to avoid the snowman debacle, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And we can say, okay, since it tapers off, we can say we take the middle from here and have it connect there. And from there we finish the shape by pulling it in. And we can give the idea of a slight, let's push this back a bit, of a slight bend that is still there with fingernail. And this is where a detail can actually help us sell the bigger idea. So if we take a fingernail and draw that as like something that isn't fully wrapping around, but is still resting on something that is slightly curved, and we draw that and pull that back, and then we deal with the overlay where the skin is coming in and is wrapping over the nail and is going back out and back up.
What's so funny?
Then we have a lot of information sold by this one detail where, okay, there's a slight curve which we can ascertain. We can ascertain that there's some depth to this by having like one part go out and another part go in the back. And we also have easily communicated this is a toe or a finger, essentially, by just drawing what's really just just a plane that we drew. And that's it. Small tip, if you draw them slightly tapering or even slightly rounded even, that generally sells the idea better than just drawing a square. It's like these fine details. To go back to Steve Houston, make things simple yet characteristic. That's a very, very good adage to use when drawing, where just keeping things simple can prevent information from getting across, but if you also try to keep them simple and yet characteristic, you get the idea across without losing too much information. That's a really good idea to think about the drawing process, where, okay, how can I simplify this, but also how can I simplify this as the thing that it represents? That's a very, very important thing to think about. Because, for example, head shapes can do so much. I can, of course, draw everything as a sphere, and that's a good representation because the base of a skull is kind of like a sphere. But if I think about heads more like characters in a way. I might just do something that is just as simple by maybe going with like a cylindrical a more what's it called, more of a triangle shape, and then have that maybe go into something that's a hairstyle, and then from there I can keep drawing and add things to it, and that takes roughly as much time as doing this shape, right? It's just a slightly different approach to things that might help me get an idea across much quicker. All right. I'm out, I think. We have 49 minutes officially, so if there are any questions.
That was dense.
There was a lot of meandering and jumping around in the end.
Yeah, but nice. It was a lot of information.
Yeah,
Cool.
Sorry about that.
No, it was perfect. That's why we're here, Lars.
That's why.
Okay.
That's the whole purpose of this course.
I mean, yeah, but it could have been like presented a bit more coherently, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, but it's great. It's great. Yeah, and I think the people logging into my Look Spain Happy Sad Days are like, it's great. Thank you so much. So, yeah, and you even teasered little feet workshops.
Yeah,
little feet.
little
Yeah,
workshop.
who would have thought?
Okay, I'm just going to. Feet again. Feet are fun because feet are this often. How can you?
Someone is asking, how can you practice best what you learn?
By. That's a loaded question, and I want to give a simple answer. You take your reference and then you break it down, and you do two different approaches to your study. You take your reference and you give yourself a goal. You don't want to take a drawing of a hand. You don't want to take the reference of a hand and then go, okay, I'm going to study the hand to learn to draw the hand, because that way there's like a myriad of things you can do to actually study the hand, right? So instead you want to take the reference and then say, okay, I want to study the form, and then you do only this for now. So you break the hand down into simple shapes and maybe connect them with a gesture if you find it, and that's what you do. And then you take different hands and do the same practice over and over, because a way to get lost is you take 20 different reference pieces of your hand of hands and then try to make like master studies or copies of all of them, and in the end you learn maybe how to render and maybe how to do the whole copy process, but you never actually drew a cylinder or a box. And you can always take cylinders and boxes and then render them. So once you've done that, because it's a very nice way to structure things, right? You make simple things and you build more complex things on top of that. Same with anatomy. You can, Kevin said that before, you can just keep doing this. You can, that's an example actually. So let's not take a hand for that example, but let's take this. Actually, let's take this arm that I've already drawn, which would make things a lot easier for me. Shoulder. Essentially, I drew a circle, but really what's going on, there's like 3 different muscles that all pull in as like a triangular shape and all connect at a part of the bicep, which by the way is more like one oval. And there's like, I forgot the name of that muscle again. And then the triceps sits slightly higher, and then there's a sinew that goes down all the way towards the ulna. And these are all different shapes, and I can draw like cross contour lines across all of these, because all of these are forms and other forms with different overlaps. Like this one pulls in here, this one pulls in here, this one is underneath that one, this one essentially has a sinew going in there, this one connects up here, and so forth. So I can keep doing this over and over again with every single detail that I can find on the human arm or anything really. I can keep getting more and more complex, but I need to understand that yes, the basic structure of this is essentially a sphere connecting a cylinder to really just another cylinder. That's the basic shape of an arm. Then the hand I can also draw as boxes or cylinders. It's at my discretion how I simplify things. The important bit is that I understand the forms that I'm simplifying.
In the proportions, right?
And the proportions. Yeah, proportion, gesture, and form are very important to get this down. You just keep repeating these ad nauseum to get where you want to be with your studies. So to reiterate, you study with intent. That's the big takeaway, I think. So take a reference and you set yourself a goal. I want to study X, and X can be gesture or form or anatomy or function, and realize that one can lead to the other. So take things one step at a time, instead of wanting to do everything at once.
That's good, man. That's good stuff.
Yeah, someone is asking if you just use your own hand as reference.
Yeah.
And then do different gestures, or like maybe something from the internet. What do you say? I think about that.
There's like a lot of asterisks that you need to put behind. Use this kind of reference and that kind of reference. Generally, drawing from life is preferable. One thing that happens if you use your own hand is perfectly fine. Just be aware that your eyes have essentially a fisheye lens effect that gets more and more extreme the closer your reference is to you, and your hand, by nature, I hope, is very close to you. So if you draw your hand very up close, your vision gets distorted because you have a point of sharpest seeing. So you dart around and you might not get the overall feeling for a form, and you confuse yourself. That's a thing that can happen. So something you can do, let's make this jump. If you go, once this whole COVID-19 thing is over, to the Drink and Draw boat, for example, and you have a model sitting there and it might say quick drawing poses or long drawing poses. You can say, yeah, I'm gonna draw, but I'm gonna draw hands. I'm gonna draw quick pose or long pose. I'm just gonna draw hands. You can do this. And then you have a model that might or might not have the perfect pose for hand gestures or whatever. But there's a model sitting at a good distance from you, in very good lighting, that has the perfect reference for you, essentially. If not, I would recommend a good mix of reference. You can draw your own hand, but I would also recommend other sources for varying reasons. One is this whole sharpest seeing thing. Another is that you actually learn to draw different types, because hands can be they can be rough, they can be more delicate, and they're all complicated, but hands have a character, and hands with character are fascinating and fun to draw. Fish eye hands, yeah.
And I mean, if you have weird hands, then all your characters will get weird hands as well.
Yeah.
Someone's asking, fingers seem to go everywhere at the same time, bending and twisting, all sorts. How do I cope?
By doing, where did I put it? This thing here, this whole bend thing, works very well in conjunction with the consideration of larger motions. So, let's say you have the finger pointing is a very good example. So you have a hand that is doing finger guns, essentially. All right, this is the kind of thing we want to do. We have a thumb that's extended, we have an index finger that extended, and the other fingers are actually curling in. So what do we do to get the point across and set up for a more in-depth study? I just realized it should be more like that. Anyway, you do the basic setup where, okay, I'm going to draw this box for the palm of the hand. I'm going to draw this tapering shape for the thumb, and I'm going to have some sort of longer.
I'm sorry, that was just.
Oh, good. It's at some point I realized this was not me messing up or being weird. This is just something that happens in the background. It's out of my control. It's all good.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I don't know. My microphone takes every single breath I have in I don't know why. It sounds. I literally just wrote me. I sound like Darth Vader.
Oh dear.
But yeah, I don't know. I hope it wasn't too distracting.
I didn't hear anything.
The whole thing. Yeah.
All right. So how do you cope with fingers? By grouping your problems, essentially. It's more of a painterly thing, I guess. Group your shadows. It's a similar principle where, okay, there's things I want to deal with and things that need more nuance. So with like this finger pointing thing, I'm going to say, okay, there's definitely this finger that's extending that I want to deal with. That's important, and I have this thumb that is going to be important.
Oh, sorry.
All good. And everything else, I'm going to just say, okay, this is not important. This is something I will deal with later. So this is a very long thumb, but through the magic of Photoshop, whatever. Oops. Oh no, the magic of Photoshop made it disappear. So I'm going to make this problem 1. 1 second. Problem 1, 2, and 3. And I can deal with this later, essentially. Like I can still do my whole detailing at a different point. And yeah. And the whole weave thing with this, you can organize fingers and finger joints with these motions. So for example, you have a hand lying down. Let's see. So same thing, we're going to have our gestures. Oh. And then we have these waves. We can keep drawing along with the gesture. We can follow these throughout the hand and keep using these as essentially milestones throughout our drawing. Or okay, we're going to hit every single joint here, but I'm going to pertain to the different proportions and rhythms I have throughout the hand. I guess the little finger is a bit long here, so I'm going to shorten it. And that's a way to structure things quickly and efficiently. And the more you do this, like this is something that happens if you draw a lot of hands and you draw them like this, you realize the different interconnected parts, the different relationships between certain movements, certain joints, and you become more and more efficient with this. So going back to the question, how do I study this? Take like 20 minutes, 30 minutes per day for like a week or two and just draw a bunch of hands with like only 2 or 3 minutes time to draw them. So you draw like 10 hands per day, for example, and none of them are very rendered. Almost all of them look, I guess, kind of like this, where, okay, I'm just going to try and draw this cylinder going in, and then I'm going to have like another flattened cylinder for the rest of the hand, because I just like using round shapes instead of like boxy shapes, but can be done with both. Neither of them are superior, both have like ups and downs. And then let's say there's maybe one finger extended like this, maybe the other two are in one shape, so I'm going to break that down accordingly. One is going in like that, and then I have maybe the thumb in the background, and that's my hand. And maybe I'm probably quicker than someone who just started, but if you can get to a similar point where you can realize, okay, this is all forms, I'm considering, then that's enough. That's already something learned and something studied. That's already something that has come from an understanding of form and has gone into the process of being integrated into your muscle memory, into your visual library to an extent. That's the part where you want to get to, where, okay, this is something that's being ingrained. Not every part of the learning process is going to feel rewarding. Some just comes off your mileage, sadly, but it's important to study efficiently and with a goal in mind. Yeah. Where did this? The video will be available later. I have recordings. Yeah. There's some awkward cut-offs, but mostly, most of this will be recorded. It's like 2-hour pieces, something like that. We should. Yeah, grouping problems is like the biggest thing.
And by the way, Kelly, this video we're recording it.
Yeah.
So.
You should also enable the Twitch playback thing, because then it's just automatically available.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. I think will we upload it on YouTube as well? The video on YouTube as well, or just Twitch? The video, will we upload it on YouTube as well, or just Twitch?
Ich weiß nicht, vielleicht erstmal Twitch.
Ja.
Aber YouTube ist so inaktiv.
Ja, aber Link posten geht ja easy. Ja. Alright. I mean, that's it for today, right?
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yes, feed it some
Lars,
other point.
thanks for this great workshop, dude.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Sure
Very
thing.
nice, yeah.
Very cathartic coming from the whole Playgrounds debacle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
That was
bummer. but
unfortunate, but yeah.
We heated the people up, and now they got what they wanted. It was cool. Right. If anyone has some more questions, now's your chance. Otherwise, you may be silent forever. I don't know.
Otherwise, you're excused.
Sprich jetzt oder schweig für immer. I don't know what to say in English.
Speak up now or forever be silent, I think is the...
Try to drop it by the boat. Yeah. Like I hope we can open it soonish, I guess, but I think it's gonna take some more time.
Yeah.
Then you're all welcome to come, and yeah, it's gonna be great.
Some draw lessons with us and drinks, and hopefully it's still summer so we can enjoy the sun together.
Oh yeah, before I forget it, the books, because I wanted to do that.
And the YouTube channels.
Can I
Actually,
actually...
you can stop recording then.
Oh
You
yeah.
can just write the names down, and people can just check it out.
Yeah, I was going to do it.